Cool. Well, I mean, thanks for joining me. I found you I don't even know how I found you, but I found you on Instagram. And the reason I wanted to really talk to you is because I'm very interested in fashion and print and that whole world and how it functions. I'm just fascinated by it and the magic and the fantasy that fashion creates. And then I often see, you know, it'll say in the credits or wherever it's posted, creative director / producer, and then it'll be someone's name. And I've done some branded stuff. I've worked with some ad agencies in a more traditional sense, but I was just so curious what that means and what the production in the print world, is what it all means, how it all comes together, and how much of it is similar or different from production as I understand it. And so I was like, you seemed really cool and you were obviously really approachable. I just randomly emailed you to your website and you responded, and here we are. So tell me a little bit about you, your background, and how you got and found your way into fashion.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned Instagram. I think for us in the fashion world, it is the most important app these days. When models apply these days, people look their profile up before they even go to the professional website. And it's a bit like that also with producers and everybody. It's our connection hub, Instagram.
Well, it's a very visual medium, right? And it's
exactly,
can't get more visual than fashion.
And it's hands-on, easy to communicate. So it's quite popular. It's very funny. I think ever since I was younger, I was very interested in fashion. Sounds a bit cliche, but I remember watching fashion TV when I was 12 years old here at home. My mom was a makeup artist, so that helped me. Sometimes she would take me to local fashion shows here. It's nothing like those big shows you imagine in Paris or New York. It's very small, very local. But it really, for me, was always a bit like a dream world, and I could always escape into that world. And maybe that was the drive when I was younger. I was like, okay, one day I want to be part of that dream world. And that kept me going. And I mean, my first Vogue magazines that I bought, they were from our local print shop, and they only had 2 copies every month, I think. And I would always rush to get one of those copies. And back then, when you opened those Vogue magazines, the productions were always, out of this world. It was always somewhere in the desert. It was creating Alice in Wonderland sets. And then it was not just about the fashion, but I think it was really creating stories. And that fascinated me. And so I made my way into the industry. I started modeling a bit. And I think, which is also something that's quite usual for this industry. Usually you don't go into fashion right away and you're like, I know I'm going to be this or that. You tried a few different things. So I tried a bit of modeling, figured out that's not for me. Then I worked a bit in a modeling agency. I was like, okay, behind the camera, I feel more comfortable. I feel more in charge.
Yeah.
Because it's the difference between modeling and acting, I think, is as a model, you really depend on if somebody likes you, and your talent is limited. I mean, you either look beautiful, and it's very subjective. I mean,
right.
Beauty to somebody is that and this. And I think as an actor, you have more force behind it. And if you really nail your role, you can convince people.
Right.
So that's why I felt more comfortable behind the camera. And then I kind of realized, okay, Germany is not the fashion capital. And I need to get out of here. I need to go somewhere else. And then London came in very handy. So I moved into London, started studying there at the London College of Fashion, which belongs to Central St. Martin's. So that to me was the big entry into the fashion world. And from there, I really then just started working and connecting a lot. I mean, it was really about meeting the people. I remember walking into rooms where people would be working for Alexander McQueen, and after a 10-minute discussion, they would be like, okay, come by next week. Let's see if you can help us out. And that way you started. So I never really had the vision, I want to be a producer. I wanted to be part of this fashion world. And then step by step, it got clarified. And until today, I always say I do creative direction and production, which I think is also very interesting. I don't know if it is that way in television or in movies, that you can say, I'm a director and a producer. Because sometimes I know with
100%.
Okay, great.
I think it's an industry that's very similar to yours, where you get to kind of play in a lot of different disciplines, and you get to go from one to the other. So you can very much start as a writer and then go be an actor who then directs and gets to produce, or a lot of people start as actors and then find other behind the camera things that are interesting, because it's almost like to what you're saying, especially from an acting standpoint, when you've gotten to be the paint in a way, you want to then be the painter, right? Like you want to you've been around it for so long, you understand how it comes together. But a lot of actors get it from like their perspective, and a lot of the actors I've spoken to on the show or just in life who grew up in the business, they get to a point where they've been around it so much that they just understand it inherently how it works. And I think those people go on to become some of the best directors we have, because they understand it on such a deep level. You know, they've been around it since they were kids. So there's a lot of similarities to your point.
That's great. I mean,
yeah,
that's also promising, because you always hear the big names,
mm-hmm.
like, okay, he's director, producer, writer, and then does it transfer down to like the entry positions? But it's good to hear. Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Well, and not to, you know, I don't want to bore you with this, but in terms of like the producer title in Hollywood is very sort of amorphous, and there are people who truly like earned it in the sense that they brought some true piece of IP or talent or money or something to the table that warrants that title. But then there's a lot of people who get that title because they were the manager of the talent, or the talent sometimes negotiates that title, so they have more bargaining power on the creative, but they're not producers in the true sense of the definition of the word, which is why you'll see like movies especially do this. Television is a little harder because it's a writer's medium, but in films it's like, oh, well, Dejan connected me to this person, he's asking for a producer credit, we're going to give it to him because his best friend is Tom Cruise, you know, or whatever. So there's like all of these unique ways that can happen. So there'll be like 20 producers listed, and you're like, who actually did this? Who made this project come to life? You know? Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the difference also to fashion. The teams are much smaller. I mean, even these days, it's really, I mean, usually 10 to 15 people is the size that is usual for a Vogue cover shoot. I know, or people tell me 10 years ago, it was double the amount of people, because there was also double the amount of budget. I don't know, that has definitely changed in fashion. The budgets are shorter and they cut down, and the industry is in a change right now. And especially now with COVID-19, it really hits the industry even harder.
Yeah, which I want to get to. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I feel that from the external view that film is a bit ahead of us. I mean, you've had this transformation where the big players like Netflix came in and changed the industry already. And now it looks like there's big budgets and the productions are actually growing, whereas we don't. Maybe you can tell me more about that. Is it that way, or how is the environment changing?
I mean, I think as it compares to fashion, I could understand how with cameras getting smaller and more accessible and more people having like anybody can go buy, you know, a really good sort of Nikon and go play as a photographer. And it's a lot less needed, generally speaking, to set up a print shoot than it is to set up, even if you're going to do a small, like 15 people, we're going to shoot a scene in this apartment. You can shoot just with a camera, but then like similar to print, there's all these other elements that take it to the next level, right? With like lighting, somebody who truly understands lighting, well, that could be just one person, but typically that's a department of at least 3 people. So there you have 3 people who are just going to be helping with lighting and shape light, right? And then you have your camera person, then you have your makeup person. So all of a sudden you're already at like 15 people and you haven't even done anything. You're just like sitting in a chair. So I think it can scale up very quickly. But I would say that while Netflix and a lot of the streamers have provided tremendous opportunity for content creation of all sorts, it's also in a way kind of started to shrink the middle class that is Hollywood even further, because it's almost like, you know, once streamers started happening, well, people started going to the movies less and less. So the middle tier of projects that used to get made, like in the $50 million budget, which is like a medium level movie, which is, you know, a lot of the movies, if you look back in like the early 2000s and you're like, how did this get made? It was a lot of that kind of stuff just in the middle. That was, they were able to, studios were able to take more risks, I feel, creatively. And then as that started, that gap started widening, you started to see, well, and now studios are getting bought by conglomerates. So they're not beholden to creatives as much as they want to be. They're beholden to stakeholders, right? And so shareholders, not stakeholders. Stakeholders are a different thing. To shareholders, and so they need to get the Marvels, they need to get their Transformers 18 and properties that are tried and true internationally, that are going to drive butts into seats into theaters, because that's still theatrical is still where a lot of the money, you know, it has been made. But so Netflix has, you know, not just Netflix, I don't want to put the onus on them, but a lot of the streamers
Amazon and Disney Plus.
Yeah, all of those guys. It's like, well, now you have literally top level talent in your TV in multiple different types of ways, you know? So what is the incentive to go to a movie theater? And so because of that, people are spending less money. And so then the studios have less money to play with. And so then there's less jobs to go around. It's sort of a trickle down effect that starts with the consumer, right? Because you can exert your power with how you spend your dollars, I would say most places, but especially here in the States. So a lot of the people have just changed their viewing habits because of the streamers. And I think the younger generation who've come up under us are just, why go to the movie theaters with your friends if you can just like watch a million things on Netflix? And I get that, you know, so
I agree.
So it's created this big disparity between independent filmmaking, traditional indie level films, which are like budgets under 10 million, which would be the equivalent of a print shoot. Sounds like a lot of money, but most of that goes to labor, you know, and it's still hard. It's still really, really hard. Or you have these big tentpole movies that the studios pour everything into because they need it to survive.
Yeah. What has also impacted fashion a lot is that we just talked about Instagram, for example. I think that over flooding of visual images, and that you also consume print very different than 10 years ago. So when Vogue did this shooting, which was $300,000 somewhere in the desert, they knew people would look at those images for weeks, and it would have an impact. These days, I mean, people look at it for an hour, and then it's like, okay. Plus, while Vogue still needs to spend $300,000 to go to the desert, an influencer can buy a plane ticket, go by themselves, and not deliver the same content. But that is the problem. People don't really care if it is the same. They're like, it's similar, and that's enough to them. So in some sense, I would actually argue that in fashion, the quality has dropped even a bit because we just need to be compatible and competitive with our social media influencers. They have become the new one people magazine, kind of the one brand magazine.
Yeah, I mean, they hold a lot of power because they have the direct audience, right? So I'm so curious. There's obviously a lot of big sort of models that exist on Instagram, but I'm curious, like how the energy is behind the scenes, the temperature, like how the industry really feels about it all. You know, it's like, is it a necessary evil, or would you say the fashion industry is quick to adapt to this is the new way forward and they're just going to make the best of it? Or is there a lot of sort of hesitation by some people behind the scenes?
It's both, I think. And in traditional print, Vogue, and not to say Vogue, but also Elle magazine and Harper's Bazaar, they still work with prestige models, and they still kind of have that vision, especially the higher end it goes on the fashion side and on the brand, they still stick to models. But then they use influencers for events, and then they use influencers to kind of distribute once that shoot has been done or once the collection has been shown with models. They come as guests and they kind of use them as billboards. That's nothing negative. I mean, they get
it's a great visual.
Really well. I mean, I think they get better paid than some billboards on Fifth Avenue in New York. So it's kind of a win-win situation for both. And that I think makes it easier, because I see it sometimes. We had some shootings with influencers in the past as well. A model, you don't need a degree to become a model, but there's a difference once you've done 100, 200 shootings. you perform and you know what you need to deliver. While an influencer is so focused on taking pictures by themselves, and they're not actually an on-camera personality. We see that when we have shootings, like they come every 10 seconds and like, can I see that picture? Can I look at that? There is more of a, well, they don't have that feeling like, okay, there's 20 people around me and they expect me to deliver. They're more used to like, okay, I'm in my own world and I know how I can perform in front of my phone. So that is very different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because it's like it's an art form. I think modeling. You could say it doesn't require a degree, but as someone who has been photographed by professional photographers, it's not easy to look effortless, you know. And you
No,
see some
definitely not.
models do some crazy ass stuff where they're weird shapes and holding a purse like all weird, but they look like they were born like that, you know, like they're just like this like totally normal to them. And there's just, I don't know, there's something about it that is magical. And I think that it is a true skill and a talent that you learn. So I could understand how, if you've been doing it for so long, you have the confidence that the team who's watching the monitor is going to guide you with the minor adjustments to get the best photograph. Whereas if you're an influencer, you're used to, like you said, doing it alone and having to constantly check and see, am I doing it right?
Yes.
Whatever right means. Yeah, it's interesting.
No, definitely. And with modeling, I mean, you see these days with the new generation of top models, they train like pro athletes almost. And when they come on the set, they usually have very strict plans what they eat and how the catering looks like. And it's not kind of out of a, oh, I'm a diva, I need this. They really have fitness plans and they know what they need to eat. And in the beginning, I think when you see it externally, you think like, why is that? But then you realize they travel sometimes 6-7 days a week. They constantly are on airplanes. And if they don't have that kind of routine, at least with their workouts and with their food, you couldn't be on that high end level. And you couldn't be 12 hours around 50 people telling you, give me that, give me this. And yeah, it definitely requires a lot of energy and professionalism.
Determination for sure. Like,
Absolutely.
you know, you really, yeah, really have to love it. I mean, I think there is this generation of like, you know, the supermodel world, like that's gone, you know, like Giselle, like the Naomi, like all of these women that have like are on one name basis, like that were truly created and plucked from obscurity, like that time I think is gone, right? Would you say?
Yes, well, there's the new girls like Bella, Gigi Hadid,
Right.
Kendall Jenner. They are also, I think, the supermodels of new generation. But I think what has definitely changed is when those girls come on set, they are actually the nicest people from the entire crew. They are the most present. They are very approachable. It's no longer, I mean, I wasn't around when the 90s were there, but from stories that I hear from people, sometimes top models would show up 6-7 hours later. That you don't have with the new generation. They are very aware they need to perform and they need to deliver. I think that has changed a bit from this,
But
like, I am the greatest in the world.
sure, but would you agree that like they also are so trained, whether it's subconscious or subconscious, that there's cameras everywhere now, right? And in
Absolutely.
real time, whereas these back then in the 90s, like somebody could write something about you, but you never knew if it was true. And now you can literally have 10 people be like, oh, Bella Hadid's acting this way, let's film it, upload it, and instantaneously it could damage years of what she's been building, right? So there is a huge investment, and I think it's the right move. It should be like this anyway, but to really show up and walk the talk, you know what I'm saying, that you're preaching, because it's like a performance a lot. It's like a it feels to me like, what are they called, it's like a live performance, not an installment.
Yeah.
What do they call it? What is it called?
Art performance,
Yeah,
like yeah,
you know, where you're like sitting on a chair in a
installation.
museum, like you're an installation. It almost feels like these women have to be constant living, breathing art installations, because they can't drop the ball at any moment, because there's so much on the line. They've created this image and now they have to live up to it all the time. So even when I think the only time they're able to truly turn off is when there's no phones around and they're alone going to bed. You know,
Yeah,
it
that's
sounds like,
very true.
yeah, it sounds like a lot of responsibility, but you know, they're hopefully love it and you're getting paid well, obviously, and hopefully it's good.
But that topic you mentioned with the pressure of everybody's recording and everybody could put out something there, I think it applies to the entire team. And that has definitely changed in the last couple of years since the Me Too movement, which also took place in fashion. And you can see it with photographers, with stylists, with everybody on the production. People are more cautious, even with jokes. I know 5 years ago, it would be easier to make certain jokes. And now, even though people know it's just a joke and there's nothing bad about it, you're very careful.
Yeah.
Are you going to use a funny nickname on somebody or not? And I actually think it is for better, definitely. But it definitely shows also that, because fashion used to always be this like, oh, we're kind of a little clique and we're in our world, almost like a family feeling. That has gone a bit. It has elevated a bit, and people are more aware. Okay, this is not my family here. This is a professional job, and I need to deliver, and I need to be careful the way I present myself, because these days everything is instantly out there in the world. And also, what is then happening once it's out there in the world, it's very hard to tell if it's true or not. And a lot of people actually don't really do the research to find out, oh, was that photographer involved in the Me Too movement or not? But once you have that stamp and that label, it gets really hard for you then even to find out the truth. And you just kind of brand it and they put you away. So that is very challenging.
I mean, there's always someone lined up in the wings waiting, you know what I mean? It's so it's interesting. But so just to back up a little bit, so once you became more of a behind the scenes producer type, will you describe then what a producer is and how that's different from a creative director?
Yeah, of course. I think with production and fashion, there's the two big things. There's print and advertising, and fashion show and events. And I started out with events and fashion shows, which is the more stressful one, because it's almost like live TV. Everything that you're producing needs to be timed on the second, and everything needs to be 100%. I think a good example I can give is the Dior show last year. It was the Dior cruise show in May in Marrakesh, and there the time was so slotted that with the sundown, the show should start. So they would hit the perfect light, but some guests didn't arrive in time.
Of course.
So the entire show was postponed 15 minutes, but that 15 minutes was almost, I mean, a game over because the lighting wasn't prepared to adjust so quickly. And I mean, we're talking here about a multi-million-dollar production that has been prepared for months. But just that fact, you don't know, like puts out so much anxiety and stress where you don't really think anymore. You just act and you just perform, and you're like, okay, we got to save this somehow. And that you don't have with print. It's a bit more relaxed. I think you have a bit more stress in the pre-production, but on the actual shoot day, you don't have that pressure and you don't have that fear. If something goes wrong, the whole thing might fall off. Yeah. So I actually then found out later that print is, I don't know if I enjoy it more, but it's definitely better for my mental health.
Yeah.
And it's on the long term also, I think, more manageable to do.
Yeah.
I know after a fashion week season, you are trained out. Yeah.
I can't imagine. I just, my experience of fashion week is living vicariously through influencers. And obviously they make it seem like it's just really fun and glamorous. And I know it isn't, because I know the world, the impression that others have of producing and making movies, and that it is this incredible magical experience, and it's just hard work behind the scenes. And so yeah, I mean, that's crazy. That's really wild that even at a show of that level with such big players, that, you know, they would not be prepared to shift everything by 15 minutes. But so you not shot, but you produced this cover of Vogue recently with Bella Hadid, right?
Yes, it's the latest Vogue Greece cover with Bella Hadid. It's their anniversary issue. They've only been around for 12 months. And because Vogue internationally has kind of rolled out a new franchise model, and they rebranding Vogue all around the world. So Vogue Greece is one of them, and they have a great team, and they do beautiful productions. And so with that shoot, maybe I can give you a bit of example how we
Yeah, I'd love
planned
to
that
know
out.
how a shoot like that comes together and what your role is in it.
Okay, great. Usually, the magazine approaches the agent of the photographer and says, we have a shoot coming up. Would this photographer be available and interested? So I think the photographer on those shoots is always the key person who needs to be clarified first. And once that is done, then you are in touch with the agent and the photographer as a producer, and they kind of discuss with you who's going to be the model, who's going to be the hair and makeup artist, who's going to be the set designer, which venue are we choosing? We need to do location scouting, we need to get permission, we need to talk to the magazine with a stylist about arranging a fitting, getting all the clothes shipped with their assistants in time to the shoot. And it's really in that pre-production phase a lot about communication and being very quick on building a team, because usually the turnaround is they request you 2 to 3 weeks before the shoot. So it's kind of a lot of pre-production where you have to find out, is that hair makeup artist available? Is that set designer available? And then put everything together in a short amount of time.
Yeah. And so then are you the person, the photographer then is the person driving all of these creative decisions of who they want to hire and who they want to partner with? Or does it depend?
Yes. Well, it depends. Usually the photographer is kind of the visionary and has the ideas. It's a very close collaboration also with the editor-in-chief or the stylist for the shoot. And then as a producer part, it's a bit like, okay, I want to shoot somewhere outside in New York. It needs to look industrial, come up with 5 ideas. And that's where I think we can be creative and where we are really forced to be creative. We have to do location scoutings and make mood boards and then send it to them. And kind of, I think with time, it's very important to have good relationships to the photographers and the stylists so that they can kind of trust you and they know they can rely on you. I think that is very important as a producer to have that relationship with them.
So then the photographer selects their producer?
Usually, yes. Yeah. Usually photographers have their producers. Oftentimes magazines come and say, oh, we have in-house somebody or we would like to suggest somebody, but photographers are very cautious on that end because they are at the end of the day artists, and they are, I mean, as you know, probably in film also, artists are very emotional driven people, and they need to have that feeling there is somebody who I know, who I trust. And I had shootings where the photographer changes their mind 2 hours before the shoot on a certain location, and you need to act very quickly. And what a photographer usually doesn't like then is a producer starts arguing with them and give them even more anxiety. There it's just about, okay, I know what he wants from me, and I know he knows that he will get it from me, and he knows that I can deliver it to him. So that's why they prefer to have their routine.
Their people, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then, okay, so then your photographer brings you on, you're responsible for, you know, a lot of these, getting these elements to them to help shape the vision. And then are you also prepping the schedule ahead of time and communicating with all of the rest of the team members, a crew, I guess, I don't know if that's how you guys would call them, the crew, to, okay, we're going to be here at this place at this time, and this is where hair and makeup is going to be done if you're on location and not at a studio. And then if there's a car that's going to take you from, like, all of the logisticals, is that all you as well?
Exactly, yes. You work very tightly there with the agent then, that is kind of the management. And you discuss flights, you book hotels, you take care of all of those things, and then you build up the call sheet. The entire industry, we all live by that call sheet that gets sent out the day before, which everybody is very nervous if it doesn't hit the mailbox till 6 in the evening. Then agents and makeup artists and everybody is
freaks
super nervous.
Out.
Where's my call sheet? Where's my call sheet?
Yeah.
So that is very important. And you got to arrange everything, like the motorhomes, the catering, everything to be there. And then with that moment, when the call sheet is over, you kind of enter phase 2, when it's the production time. And as a producer, you have to be the first person on set, and you have to be the last person leaving the set. So, and it is definitely not as glamorous as people always think when they feel like, oh my God, wow, you produced it. Like, yes, I produced it, but I also had to make sure at 5:30 in the morning that the first truck who drops off the set is
That's right.
on time there and everything is working well. The makeup people sometimes don't show up until 9. You
Yep.
already worked 4 hours.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And so then and how long is a day typically? Is there?
I would say for the producer, it usually starts around 5 to 6 a.m. in the morning, usually, because it depends also if it's in studio or on set. On set, definitely that's early in the morning because you're depending on light and on the environment. In a studio, sometimes you can be there also at 7, and then you start prepping up everything.
Yeah.
And the studios in New York, in LA, I think Pier and Milk are two good examples. Are so very well organized studios, so they help us, the producers.
Yeah.
And
So it's like a 12-hour day, would you say? Minimum?
Honestly, more going to. I never hit home before 10 p.m. on a day like that, so it's more like 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
And then on the actual shoot day, it's less about being the organizer. It's more, I see my responsibility as making sure the mood is good. And I don't want to say it in a negative way, but being also a bit of an entertainer. So making sure the model is in a good mood, kind of sensing if the photographer is happy with this, what do people need on set. So it's really kind of listening, looking, and then trying to be responsible for a good mood.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're like the person who's throwing a dinner party, you know, so you've done all the prep work and now all your guests are at the dinner party and you just have to make sure they have everything they need, because it is very similar to production. It's just that you're setting up for a sprint and we're usually setting up for a marathon, so it's that times 30 days.
I love
like a lot more people. Yeah, it's kind of like that. But there is still the sense of like, if you've done everything properly in prep, when you get to the actual production day, there's not much to do. It's like you're problem solving in real time because things will come up. But you shouldn't be looking back at something that, like, you shouldn't start thinking about what time lunch, you know, when lunch is getting delivered the day of the shoot. Like that stuff should have been set up weeks in advance, you know, stuff like that. Yeah. So it's interesting. Okay. So then you finish your shoot day and you've shot the cover, or you've shot the print has been shot. What's the next steps for you as a producer? Are you involved at all in any of those steps, or do you walk away and you're ready to start the next thing?
No, then comes the third phase, which is the post-production, which I have to admit was for me kind of the hardest to get into, because that's then where it's like you do all the financial stuff, you do the invoices, you compare all the budgets that have been spent. You sometimes have to go back to magazines and tell them, oh, actually we spent a couple of $1,000s more than we had, and then you negotiate things. You talk to the photographer and you kind of help them with their post-production when they have to send images for proof corrections before they go into print. So there still is a lot in that post, and it's very important that you kind of are very precise on that. I, at the beginning, always thought like, oh, it's fine, you just write some invoices. And then I realized, oh, it's not that easy. Like, you do have to be very precise, and you can't be taking it too easy. It's like a serious and 2-day office job where you sit in front of your laptop and Excel is your best friend.
Yeah, Excel is the best.
Excel, yeah. I pronounce it always different as a German.
Wait, how did you say it?
Excel?
Excel? I like Excel. It sounds kind of like Axl Rose. I like it. It's kind of like the rock star version of Excel. Excel's like for nerds, and you're like Axl.
That's cool. Yeah, I love that.
No, there's so many similarities. I love it. It's so cool to learn. Okay, so then, you know, now that you've been doing it for how long as a producer?
Well, 3.5, 4 years now. Yeah.
Okay.
But I've been in the fashion industry for 10, and on the production side, I've focused now for 3.5
Yeah.
years.
So then you've been in it long enough that I'm curious, what misconceptions do you feel that others in the industry or completely outside who don't know anything about it, what misconceptions do people have about producers? Are there any misconceptions?
I think the one misconception that I have, because I also do creative directions on some jobs. So of course with Vogue, it won't happen that they call you and say like, oh, we don't have a stylist. Like, can you do it tomorrow? Like for smaller projects that I've done, literally sometimes you don't have a stylist. And then through my background with London College of Fashion and being in-house, I mean, I've been also with Tom Ford production in-house. They require a lot of style and design expertise from you. So I feel very safe going on a shoot and honestly even styling. And on smaller projects, it definitely is a nice way then to put that creative input and also be more the drive on like, okay, this is how we're going to do it. This is how it's going to look like, not just the organizer. So I think that is definitely a misconception where people always think like, oh, you're the producer, I'm the creative director. So no, there's sometimes where it is that way, but usually not. So you can be both though. I mean, I realize it, and I'm very happy that you can build a way around that. The industry is not so much like, why do you do this and why do you do that?
Right.
Just,
Being both, you mean the producer and the creative director doing both?
Yeah, you can. I mean, usually don't do both jobs together, but you can do them separately. I mean, 1 week I can, 1 week I can be producing both covers, and the next week I get booked on a job where I'm the creative. That's what I want to say.
Got it. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of doing what you do?
I think you, and I don't want to say negative, but like it's definitely challenging because you're around a lot of personalities. And on a shoot, for example, when we shoot with Naomi Campbell and a star photographer and a star stylist and one of the top hair and makeup artists in the world, it is always finding your way into that and knowing there's a lot of people who come with demands because the higher professional people they have very certain expectations and they need that high end kind of delivery. So that is definitely something you have to cope with in the beginning. Because like I remember being on one of my first jobs and 6 people come on you and say, this doesn't work right, this is not here, this is not there. And you feel kind of overwhelmed and you feel like, oh, this is too much for me. And then you have to take it kind of with a breathe in and be like, okay, it's not personal, they just expect, and that's my job. So managing all these talented people on one set. And I don't know if that is a good question. I wanted to know. I think with film, it's very clear the hierarchy, like the director and everybody follows the law or the word of the director. Whereas in fashion, yes, the photographer is the main character, but the other people still have their voice and their opinion. And sometimes it feels very, it's liberal because everybody puts in their input, but it also can become a bit chaotic, when the photographer says, I don't want to do this, where the stylist says, no, let's do this. And then you're in the middle as a producer, you're like, okay, who do I listen to now? Because I know one, I'm going to disappoint. Is it that way with film that it's like really, okay, nobody has anything to say when the director says it one way?
On the best sets, no. The spirit of independent filmmaking, particularly, which is the world I operate in, is very collaborative. I would imagine if you're coming into a television show that's, where a director is more of like a for hire gun that's executing a vision and a plan that's already there, I would imagine there's a little less room for creative input in that sense. But in the world that I come from, a lot of those conversations, I think it's just a matter of time. While we still don't have a ton of time, we have more time than a print shoot. So, sometimes you have 6 weeks of prep. So in all of that time, you're having these conversations with the department heads that you as a director have brought on, whether because you knew them or they were recommended by producers but you met them at some point. Every director signs off on their department heads because there's something there that they want to collaborate with that person on. Yeah. So you kind of know, and as a producer, it's a lot of like knowing the personalities ahead of time that are going to be best suited to work with that director. So there's somebody who could be really, really amazing, but that it's going to be a clash of personality types. So sometimes it's helping people navigate, but some directors come with their team, they have their people. So it depends, it just like depends on where that director is, how much they've been working. I work with a lot of directors who are sort of, I wouldn't say new, they have been around the business for a long time, but they haven't never been given the reins to make their first features. So then we as producers support them by giving sort of recommends to all of the kinds of people that we think would be great. But from that moment, once you're prepping, like there's the prep period is where it's all made. I mean, if you prep, like you were saying, if you prepped something well enough, day of is just going to be execution. And yes, there'll be a tons of things and tweaks and problems to solve, but you've done enough of the homework that you're not going to, hopefully, if you have someone who's truly a team player, you're not going to be sitting there having an argument. This happens a lot with directors of photography and production designers, because they have to work very, very closely together. And there's many elements that are crossover elements. So an example is, there's a scene, and in the scene of this apartment, there's a light that's a practical light that you see in the world, right? It's not just lighting the actors. Well, that light is now part of set dressing, which technically is a production designer's domain. But the light itself, the temperature of the light, all of these things, the angle of the light, that's your director of photography. So you can sometimes, I've seen this on previous projects where, you have these conversations ahead of time, the day of, okay, well, we want this light over here. Well, the DP doesn't like the light there. And the production designer is like, well, but if you move this light, it doesn't, now you've ruined the symmetry of my set. So you can't, so there'll be a lot of these kinds of things that come up on the day, but the best of people find a way to move forward quickly, because time is money, and you've spent all of this time prepping. So you have precious, 20, 30 days to execute an entire world, and there's a lot of money and time on the line. So it's in the best interest to move quickly. That's why you do as much of that heavy lifting up front, because you're not going to have the time. It's like you have the time, but for every minute you're spending having these conversations, it's a minute of footage you're not getting. It's a minute with your actors you're not getting. So the director gets to make that call, right? If you want to be nitpicky about something that should have been established ahead of time, that's fine, but we still have to be done with the scene by this time, and you're going to get what you're going to get. So you pick, So there's a lot of that. It's like, I always like to say, we can do anything. It's just a matter of time and money, and it's a creative decision. It's like, we can do all of the things, but these are the compromises that come with that. So then you get to tell me which version of this you want to do, and we'll make it happen, And so you really empower your creatives and your directors to problem solve together with you, as opposed to being the producer that's like, this is how we're going to do it, and da, 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 and you're telling someone how to do something. It just doesn't breed the best energy on a set. And to your point earlier, like if it's one day, it's hard to stay up and be the party host for one day. But when it's 30 days, it's really hard, because you're 16-hour days every day minimum, and you're not off on weekends as producers, because if there's a problem, you're the person dealing with it. So you really are plugged in to the outlet that is production for months, because you can never drop the ball at any moment, because it's all sort of on you. But there was something you said, and I wanted to come back to it. You were saying how, dealing with all these personality types can be one of the most challenging parts of it. So I was curious how you have personally managed in your own ways, I guess, of decompressing or whatever. What does that look like for you? How do you let all that go to continue showing up and doing your best work?
I mean, I think a good example is the first time I was on set with Germany's Next Top Model. That is where I have a bit of television experience as a freelance producer, and we were shooting with Heidi Klum. And I remember, I think I was prepping myself, listening to Eminem, Lose Yourself, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go there and perform. And I think I even imagined, like, after one day producing with Heidi Klum, this was my best friend. So then you show up on set and you realize, wow, there's 50 people here. I'm not gonna be best friends with her. And I think that day I was very much like, okay, let's not make a mistake. Everything has to be perfect. But that way I ended up not being so present. I ended up being super stiff, and I went back to the room at night because it was in LA, because I flew out from New York to LA. And I ended up going back to my hotel room, and I was like, wait, like, I wasn't even there on that set. I don't know even what I did. Like, I was very robotic. And it kept me on for a few weeks where I was like, I think I need to change that approach and take it a bit more relaxed on my end. Like, yes, really be super precise and be focused. I think focus is an important word, but then also realize we're humans, and there will be failures, and there will be things that are not running smooth. And in order to then cope with those things, you need to be present in that moment and relax. And not have the fear that if you do something wrong, it's gonna become a disaster. Like whatever it is, you have to find a solution to it. And I think that approach then helped me changing it, and going away from that. It all needs to be perfect and I need to perform.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I want to be my best self. And something that I always live by, and it's very important to me, be very nice to everyone on set. It's
Yeah.
super important to me. I think you never know, first of all, where people are going to end up. I remember when I was on my first Tom Ford set, back then there was somebody who used to be a hair makeup artist assistant. Now he himself is a makeup artist who works for Vogue. So, I mean, if I would have not been nice to him back then, and then you see him now on set, it's like, okay, hello, karma is a bitch at the end of the day. So it's very important to treat people nice. And I think what's even more important is if people sometimes don't treat you nice, because it gets, like you just said, sometimes time comes in and budget pressure, and some people sometimes don't know the way they articulate themselves the best. You still handle it very professionally, and that you try to take it very focused on how can I solve this, and not like, oh, they attacked me. So that's super important to have that in mind. So also how you deal with when people explode on set and sometimes are not at their nicest, which is sadly sometimes the case in fashion, not just in fashion, everywhere. I think where pressure comes in, because and it took me some time also to realize that I was like, oh, why is that person so mean to me? And then I actually understood that person really, they wake up in the morning and they want to deliver something great, because they're all, to work for magazines like Vogue or to be working at Tom Ford, it's not a job where you come and be like 9 to 5 and you go home. Those people like me, also, it's a dream and a vision. You always took this as like, that's my life. So they want to perform at the best. And when sometimes the makeup doesn't work out they want it to, they are also disappointed. So it's in the end just shows that they are committed to their work and they love what they do.
Yeah, I think the term artist gets a bad rep. You know, I think that you are creating something and it takes a team of people who are all creatives in some way, shape, or form. Like choosing a locations is a creative thing. So to me, it's like you have all of these collaborators, and it can be as small as 10 people or 100 people. I think even on our sets, like a PA is a collaborator. The guy who's moving the light around and moving cable is collaborating. And so all of that stuff is important. And I think nobody gets into these fields because they're like, oh, you know, I really love just like moving gear back and forth. It's because they love the art form in some way, shape, or form. So I believe that, you know, when I look at people on my set, I'm like, all these girls, all these men and women were boys and girls at one point who like were mesmerized by something about this film industry and the magic of movies, that they wanted to be here. And now they get to be here in ways that they can contribute with the talents that they bring to the table. So you are living your dream, and that is an inherently emotional thing. So even though you're not doing a job that on paper seems emotional, I think the whole process of creativity is inherently emotional, and it attracts emotional people. So that's what makes it challenging, is because you have tens or hundreds of people who are all on different emotional wavelengths all at the same time. And you as a producer have to, it's like herding cats. You have to like know how to best deal with all of these personality types, understanding that sometimes others will take priority. So if Naomi Campbell is dealing with some stuff and needs some stuff, she's going to take priority over this other person who is maybe like losing their shit over here because of time and budget, you know, and all of these other things. But I think if you can step back, it's like everybody's showing up, like you said, to do their best work and to be the best version of themselves. And sometimes they miss the mark because they're imperfect humans, like we all are. So, I mean, there's also people who are just negative, toxic, terrible humans. But I think that those people, you know, they're coming from a place of pain in their lives, and you're not going to change those people. Like I would always like to say on my sets, like, well, I can't make them a better human. I just can't. Like that's a choice they have to make for themselves, right? So I can only work with what I'm given. And if you exhibit negative personality and a toxic energy all the time, then it's just not, I'm not here to rescue you. And I'm not going to be able to keep you on my side, because you're infecting a lot of people that are showing up to do work that is very demanding. And that is my job, to protect this collective that's inside this, you know, this cocoon of creativity to do the best work. From a business perspective as well, you know, it's like all of it is impacted. at the micro level that then impacts the macro. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah.
And I also like to think, I mean, Michelle Obama said this great word: when somebody goes low, you always go high. And that
Yeah.
always sticks with me. I mean, because somebody screams at me, I have two options. Either I stay patient, or I also become panic and scream back. But I know one thing for sure: situation is not going to get solved if I also start
Yeah.
screaming and panic back. So that's something that is, I think, always good to consider. And then having your vision also. I mean, you know, where do you want to go? What is your goal? And then not just when the small problems come up that you lose it, but then you think, okay, that's fine. Like I'm here in a big production, something doesn't go right, but I'm learning something from it. This is a lesson, and I can develop from it.
Yeah.
So that you take it more on a long vision. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I want to be mindful of time just because we are almost at the hour mark, believe it or not.
Oh wow.
Correct.
Oh wow. That went quickly.
I know I can talk forever. So if I don't like keep myself on check, like we'll be here for 3 hours and you're like,
Well, make two of us.
I gotta go to sleep.
You and I should never host the Oscars then. I think they would cut
I know,
us
right?
off.
Maybe we'll do it on a streamer. It's just a 24-hour event. You can tune in whenever you want.
That would be great. Yeah.
Right. But I have a few more questions, and if there's anything I don't get to, obviously let me know. We can touch upon it. But so one of the things about my show and the podcast, and the reason I started it, and the name Life with Kaka, which is sort of this play on my nickname and talking about the messy parts of life and the messy parts of our journeys. You know, I'm sort of like a junkie, and I'm obsessed with how people navigate the true challenges of their lives, and the moments when things haven't gone the way you thought, and maybe there was a year or two where you weren't working, or things weren't happening, or there wasn't forward progression, whether in your career or in personal parts of your life, you know. And I'm just so fascinated by what is it that makes people push through personally, like in their own journey, and how they do that. So I pose this question to you because I'm curious, has there been a time, I mean, you're so young, you're still just in the infancy of your career, but you've also been around for almost a decade, you said. So you've been in it, you know, you're earning your stripes. And so in that time, has there been this tremendous challenge that you faced, and how have you gotten through it?
Yes, definitely. I think, to be honest, challenging times happen almost weekly. But one period that I know was very challenging is when I came from London to America, and I sort of was in a good run in London. Finished my degree, worked for a few companies, and I was like, I thought like, oh, this is going well. I know people. I'm a bit established, and you come to New York, and nobody really knows you, nobody cares. And for months, I was like sending emails, trying to get meetings. Then you get a meeting, and people listen to you for 5 minutes, and then they tell you they get back to you, and they never get back to you. I think there was a time where it was very difficult to stay positive and to feel like, oh, I'm living my dream. It felt a bit more like, I don't know if that is right what I'm doing. You start to question everything. And I think confidence, it takes a lot of time to build it up, but you lose it very quickly.
Mm.
Um, so I think in that period, for me, what was very important is to go inside me and be like, what is my vision, and what is the meaning that I have behind this job? And um, one of the reasons, and then I always thought back when I was a child, it was always a dream for me, a dream world, and it gave me a feeling of happiness, and it excited and entertained me. And that's something that I wanted to keep on even while working on these projects. I always wanted to have that positivity with me. And so, I mean, I know from that Germany's Next Top Model job, which is a good example, when they actually didn't book me for working with them on further episodes, I think I was, for, like I said, for a few days very down, but then figured out, okay, how can I actually grow from this? How can I learn from this? And I reached out to other people. I took some new roads and went into new directions. So never really letting go just because it doesn't work for you. I think it's super important, but to have that patience, because I see in my generation these days, there's a problem and a big thing doesn't work out. we throw our hands up and like, oh, it doesn't work, I'm going. But no, to say I'm sticking because I know I chose it and I believe in it and there's meaning for me to it. So I'm going to go this path, and it's going to be hard work, and it will take some time to get some rewards for that.
Yeah, that's really good advice, a good point rather, which brings me to my next question. Actually, as we wrap up, if someone's listening and they want to mirror some of the career choices you've made and have this desire to get into print and fashion in some way, what advice would you give to that person, whether they are like 19 straight out of college or they're whatever age wanting to make a pivot into that industry? What advice would you give?
I would definitely say get as much work experience as you can get. Like apply for as many things. Like I just said, I started with many different things during my time in London and being a student. I worked in showrooms. I worked in design parts. I worked on the event part. I worked in communications. So really trying to be in all different fields, getting work experience, and also doing things that honestly you don't want to do. I mean, I had to clean showrooms. Like, I mean, people were like, okay, here, the showroom is dirty, clean it. Like, that's not why I'm here for it, but you do it. And you kind of take on these things, and that helps you then to kind of stick your road and to go your way. And one term I always like to use, it's all about visibility. So don't rely too much on your title. And I've had some jobs where I was the intern, but because I was so present and I tried to do a great job and offered myself, I was very present on set and offered myself. It actually got me to higher positions and to work with companies now as a freelance creative, where they book me for campaigns. That is something that I can recommend to anybody out there. Don't rely too much on your title, but be very visible and do your best work that you can get out there, and it will be rewarded for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We always say on our sets, you get your next job based on the job you're currently on, because everybody's always watching, everybody's looking, everybody's seeing. It's just everybody's observing, everybody sees just how the energy that you have, the enthusiasm you have to do any task, big or small. And, at the end of the day, I think no matter what industry you're in, it's all going to be inherently challenging. And so we want to surround ourselves with people that are going to have a good attitude. Like, I think because the rest of the stuff can be learned. And it's harder to teach someone how to be a good person than it is to teach them how to do a PO or properly do an invoice or, or whatever. So I think that's really solid advice. And I hope that I'm curious to see what fashion is going to look like on the other side of COVID-19. I'm sure you are as well.
We all are. It's very interesting. And I mean, I love that we're also talking right now, because for me, the next step in the next couple of years is I want to move over in the production side a bit more to entertainment and television. So it was very helpful and very great to speak and kind of hear your experiences also, and to find out what are similarities and what is really the big difference. And what really stood out for me when you said a fashion shoot is a sprint, where a film production is a marathon.
Yes.
Like, I think that a lot of things are similar, but the time spent are very different.
Time spent, and the amount of people and navigating that is a little harder, but it's not anything that you can't learn. It's just getting into it and understanding. But thank you so much for taking the time and speaking to me and sharing your journey and your experiences with me and the listeners. It's what it's all about. I'm very grateful and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing it, because I think it's so important that there are valuable podcasts out there where people really use their knowledge. And I say knowledge because it's important to go out there and share something that other people can find inspiring and that can help them for their career. So it's a beautiful thing. Thank you so much for doing it.
Well, you're very welcome.